And today we are meeting in the Capitol, but also WebEx. And so welcome to those that are on WebEx. Today we have a hearing on Senate Bill 117. That's expanding the property tax exemption for Strother Field Airport property. And we can have a staff overview. Yes. Okay, I would like to, but could we take roll and see, Connie, could you call the roll? Okay, I will call the roll. Allie is here. Senator Owens.
Present.
Thank you. Senator Ware.
I'm here.
Senator Blue. Senator Corson.
Present.
Senator Dietrich.
Present.
Senator Klemp.
Here.
Senator Cluse. Senator Reichman. Senator Titus.
Here.
Senator Tyson.
Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Thank you. So now we'll proceed to our first bill, Senate Bill 117. And if you would give us a little brief. Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Senate Bill number 117 would expand the property tax exemption for Strother Field Airport property. Specifically, the bill would amend KSA 79201R to include property owned by the political subdivisions that comprise the Strother Field Airport Commission and that is depicted on the airport's federally approved airport layout plan, whether the property is used for aviation-related purposes, to promote aviation commerce, or to provide revenue to operate all Strother Field components and activities. The bill would also remove the requirement that the property be owned by the commission prior to or on January 1 of 1992. And the bill would also clarify this particular statute. Its language is a little out of the ordinary compared to some other property tax exemptions. And so to clarify that this is a property tax exemption that would exempt this property from all property and ad valorem taxes under the laws of the state of Kansas is also included here. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Do we have any questions? Hearing none, we will move on. Our first proponent is Mr. Mike Taylor. Mike, are you online?
Yes, I'm here, Senator.
Okay, proceed.
All right. Thank you very much, committee. I appreciate you holding this meeting despite the winter weather outside. I'm here on behalf of the Strother Field Airport and Industrial Park, asking for your support for Senate Bill 117 because it is an important economic development measure for Kansas, and more importantly, perhaps, it will prevent the residents of Ark City and Winfield, which own the airport, from having to pay property taxes to support it. Strother Field is a municipal and industrial park owned by Ark City and Winfield. It's also a major economic development engine in south central Kansas. Last year, $2.1 billion in economic impact, 1,700 jobs, and a $189 million payroll. It operates without collecting a single dollar of property tax from Arc City and Winfield residents because the rents paid by the companies located in the industrial park cover the costs. But the ability of Strotherfield to be self-supporting is somewhat in danger. In 1991 and 92, the Kansas Legislature amended KSA 79201 to recognize the unique nature of Strotherfield, and it exempted all the lands and buildings from property tax. Jump forward 2 decades, and the Board of Tax Appeals has failed to recognize that special Strotherfield status. Arc City and Winfield have had to argue 5 cases before the Board of Tax Appeals. Now they've won 4 out of those 5, and that 5th one is on appeal. But here's the problem. The legal cost of challenging those decisions and the substantial cost of having to pay property tax on the buildings and land could threaten Strotherfield's ability to be self-supporting. So far, they've had to pay or spend $500,000 on these BOTA cases and paying taxes. That's money that would have gone to operate the airport. So what we're asking is to clarify what the legislature originally intended back 2 decades ago with this legislation and approve the Strotherfield bill to prevent those things from happening again and return it to the status that was originally intended and continue to keep it as an economic development engine, and also would allow for the people of Arc City and Winfield to not have to pay property tax to support it. I'll answer questions if possible when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I think what we'll do is move on to our second proponent, and then we'll have questions after that. So the second would be Randy Fraser, City Manager of the City of Arc City. Randy, are you on? Randy, are you on? Are you on mute? Okay, we do have written testimony from Randy, and we'll try to get him on in just a moment. We'll take any questions for Mr. Taylor. Is there any questions from the committee? Any questions from the committee? Hearing no questions from the committee, and is anybody's hand raised or anything? No hands raised. Okay. You do have written testimony from the City of Arc City, Randy Fraser, and we also have written testimony from the City of Winfield, Taggart Wall. So please review those. With that, I don't have any other information. So if there's nobody online, and Mr. Fraser, one more time, is not here, we will close that hearing, and we'll move to a hearing on Senate Bill 229. And with that, could you give us a update on 229?
Yes. Hello, Chairman.
Charles, okay, there we go. Yes, yes,
Can the committee hear me?
yes.
Okay, very good. So SB 229 pertains to legislative oversight of occupational licensing requirements set forth in agency rules and regulations or in statute. The bill provides for the termination of currently existing occupational licensing requirements with certain exceptions contained in either statutes or rules and regulations on July 1st, 2030, unless the legislature renews such requirements by passage of a concurrent resolution. Statutory or regulatory occupational licensing requirements enacted or adopted after the effective date of the bill
Still on? Charles, are you still there?
Committee, I apologize about that. My laptop just died and I had to plug it in.
Okay.
So, can the committee still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. Again, the statutory regulatory occupational licensing requirements enacted or adopted after the effective date of the bill, which is July 1st, 2025, terminate after 5 years from the effective date, unless they're continued by the legislature via concurrent resolution. Agency rules and regulations adopted on and after July 1st, 2025 require legislative approval via a concurrent or joint resolution prior to becoming effective. The bill also provides a procedure for notification of pending termination dates of occupational licensing requirements by the Secretary of State with respect to those requirements and rules and regulations, and by the reviser of statutes with respect to those requirements established in statute. The bill sets forth the process for review by the legislature, including referral to relevant committees of each chamber, a report and presentation by legislative research staff to each committee, and a written recommendation by each committee to the legislature. So if the chairman would approve, I'll just go through the bill by section. Section first, the first section pertains to definitions. There are a couple of definitions that are of importance here. First, the definition for agency, which is broad and includes state institutions and local governments, but there are a couple of exceptions. One exception is any agency that regulates the healthcare provisions, and specifically the State Board Board of Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, the Board of Examiners in Optometry, the Board of Nursing, the Kansas Dental Board, the State Board of Healing Arts, the State Board of Pharmacy, and in addition, engineers are also exempted. The State Board of Technical Professions is also excluded. So any occupation regulated by the State Board of Technical Professions. Section 2 provides for the termination of the occupational licensing requirements that I referenced. Again, all occupational licensing requirements, either in statute or in rules and regulations, that are currently in effect, that are in effect on July 1st, 2025, the effective date of the bill, will terminate within in 5 years, terminate on July 1st, 2030, unless reviewed and continued by a concurrent resolution of the legislature, pursuant to the process that's specified in the bill. Licensing requirements enacted by the legislature, adopted by an agency on and after July 1st, 2025, terminate after 5 years, unless, again, reviewed and continued by the concurrent resolution of the legislature. There's a requirement that every such statute and rule and regulation adopted or enacted after July 1st, 2025 contain a statement that the licensing requirement terminates on the specified date, that is 5 years, and that the licensing requirement is subject to review and continuation by the legislature before the termination date. The legislative review process and continuation by concurrent resolution is also specified in this section. The standing committees of the House and the Senate that customarily consider relevant legislation of the applicable subject matter, as determined by the Speaker and the President, conduct reviews of a licensing requirement. So each chamber, committee in each chamber conducts a review. The review process includes a presentation and report to the committee by legislative research staff. And there are specific requirements for that report and presentation. That includes the public health, safety, or welfare objectives of the licensing requirement, whether such objectives are being realized, alternative, less restrictive measures to meet such objectives or modified objectives, and an analysis of whether the licensing requirement is the least restrictive means to achieve such objectives, a review of comparable regulation by other states, discussion of the effect on job creation and retention by the occupational licensing requirement, a cost and benefit analysis, including compliance and opportunity costs, such as fees for licensing, educational costs, and also an estimate of time required for an applicant to meet the requirements of obtaining licensure. Also identified indirect costs are to be reviewed, and any costs to the state, including administrative expenses. So upon review of the report and presentation by legislative research staff, each committee provides a written recommendation to the Speaker of the House or the Senate President as applicable. And the report of legislative staff is also included in that written recommendation that is provided to the legislature. The Speaker and the President have the discretion to also refer the matter to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, and the Joint Committee would then provide written recommendations based on its review to the Speaker and the President for distribution to the legislature. There's no requirement for a legislative research staff report to the Joint Committee. The Section 2 then goes on to the procedure for notification of pending occupational license requirements to agencies and to the legislature. With respect to rules and regulations, that is, occupational licensing requirements contained in rules and regulations, it is a Secretary of State that has a duty of monitoring the termination date of occupational licensing requirements. And the Secretary is to provide notice to the agency that adopted those requirements, as well as to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate of the termination date at least 18 months prior to that termination date. A licensing requirement that is not noticed to the agency and to the Speaker and President would remain in effect until the date that is 18 months from the date that such notice is provided. With respect to statutes, notice of the pending termination is provided by the Office of Reviser of Statutes. And this provision is, the committee may recognize some of the language here. It's similar to the provision that governs review of exceptions to the Open Records Act. The Office of Reviser of Statutes provides notice by certification of the licensing requirement and date of termination to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, and that's to be done by July 15th of the year preceding the year in which the licensing requirement would terminate. A statutory occupational licensing requirement that is not identified and certified continues in effect until it is noticed to and reviewed by the legislature. If the Reviser of Statutes identifies an occupational licensing requirement that should have been certified to the President and the Speaker, the Reviser of Statutes is to include that requirement in the following year's certification. The statutory licensing requirement remains in effect until it has been reviewed and considered by the legislature. So would note that there is a difference there in how regulations and statutes are considered. A regulation, it's possible to lapse by legislative inaction as long as there is notice provided. A statute will not, an occupational licensing requirement in statute will not lapse until the legislature reviews and considers it. Section 3 provides legislative approval by concurrent resolution for occupational licensing requirements adopted by an agency on or after July 1st, 2025. So any occupational licensing requirement in a rule or regulation adopted by an agency after the effective date of the bill must be approved by concurrent resolution of the legislature. Unless, of course, it's ratified by enactment of a bill as provided by the recent legislation last year, 2024 HB 2648. That's at KSA 77441. The procedure is basically the same as what I just went through with respect to reviewing termination of licensing requirements. The matter is referred to the relevant committee by the Speaker and the President. Legislative research staff prepare and present a report to each committee, and the report is essentially the same requirements that I just discussed. And then each committee provides a written recommendation to the Speaker or the President as applicable. And again, the staff's report is included with that written recommendation to the legislature for review. There's no specific provision here with regards to referral to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations. As I've mentioned, if enacted, this bill would become effective July 1st, 2025. And I thank the committee for your indulgence in going through that.
Thank you very much. We'll hold any questions until the last. Let's move on to our proponents. And our first proponent is Elizabeth Patton, State Director of Americans for Prosperity. Elizabeth, are you online?
I am. I'm here.
Oh, please proceed.
All right. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to testify in favor of this legislation. We are excited about this policy, and that we believe that doing a bill of this magnitude to make sure that we have the right things in place to sunset unnecessary occupational licensing does a few things that are really important to the economy of our state long term, specifically looking at making sure that we as a state and all of our industries are competitive, and that we are making sure we are up to date with industry standards, and also making sure we are not continuing on in any occupations that might have undue, unnecessary, outdated pieces on their books that are creating barriers for people to seek employment in our state. We also think that this will help save the state government ultimately with this process, while it is adding some process to this. At the end of the day, with the enforcement, this saves money for all of those agencies in the long term by potentially eliminating unnecessary pieces in their regulatory book. And we also believe that this can help increase the cost of living or lower the cost of living, for Kansans, in that it will make it a lot more achievable for them to gain a new occupation. As the revisor mentioned, it does exempt a handful of agencies from the legislation. That was intentional. And we are primarily looking at opportunities to make certain that those who are most affected by this legislation, about 29% of workers would be impacted by a license that affect their jobs under this piece of legislation. And so we know that our state is facing some labor supply issues and economic mobility, and we think this is a step in the right direction to solve both of those problems. We see that some, not all, of our occupational licenses in Kansas have become a barrier to employment. And we wanted to specifically point out the success that Colorado has recently had. They, in 2024, had some sunset reviews conducted in that state, and they revealed many of their licensing requirements that were outdated, that did not adequately reflect the current market needs. They recommended eliminating and revising numerous licenses to enhance their workforce and participation in economic growth. And it was massively successful in Colorado. We never like being beat by any of our neighbors. So we are hopeful that the state of Kansas can follow suit with them and other states who have done similar things. A few years ago, we also supported a similar but not identical review process for just regulations in general. But what we are looking at specifically today is a sunset, not just a review of these of the necessity and effectiveness of existing occupational licensing. We want, again, to make sure that we are keeping pace with market demands, that we are not imposing unnecessary burdens or fees on workers. And we are just asking that government agencies do their jobs. So we think at the crux of this bill that lawmakers are able to, who are the elected officials, critically evaluate which occupations truly require a license based on public health and safety needs in accordance with the recommendations from the agencies. And we really do believe that even in Kansas, many of our licensed occupations could be regulated through less restrictive means and perhaps even move to things like voluntary certification, which we see in other states. That is the legal trajectory, the legislative trajectory we have seen in many other states. So we want to make sure that Kansas remains competitive in all of those fields. And over time, we don't see us, again, lag behind and make it harder for people to find a job and get work in Kansas. I am happy to get into more about the process of the bill, but I think I will stop there, and I would be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. What we're going to do is move on to our second proponent, and then after the proponents, we will take the questions. So we'll move on. Thank you very much. Our second proponent would be Wendy Doyle, President and CEO of United We. Wendy, are you online?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And it's great to be with you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. And as mentioned, my name is Wendy Doyle. I'm President and CEO of United We. We're honored to be with you today to testify in support of the intent of SB 229. Just real quickly, United We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank that's focused on the economic development of women and their families in Kansas. Our North Star is labor force participation by women in the workplace or entrepreneurship, because we know that if women are working, we're contributing to the overall Kansas economy. The why we are focused on this piece of legislation are a couple of points. First and foremost, per our research, women hold a professional license to do their profession at 3 times the rate that men do. So we certainly want to make it easy for women in Kansas to get to work. Secondly, in this environment of government efficiency, we should be looking at putting best practices in place for Kansas. Obviously, with this piece of legislation, keeping the health, safety, and welfare of Kansas in the forefront. We're really excited about the Sunrise provision, which looks at putting guardrails and best practices, a cost-benefit analysis in place for Kansas to review any future profession that could require some oversight. An example that we like to give is the billion-dollar industry of the pet industry, that currently pet groomers are not required to have a license, nor do we want that to happen. We want them to continue to work. So really putting in place to make sure before we immediately jump into additional regulation that we have guardrails in place, and we're most excited about that. If this is adopted, Kansas will become the 15th state in the country to have a Sunrise provision, and we hope that's true, comes to fruition. The second piece that we're excited about is the sunset provision, but really, again, the guardrails for Kansas to thoroughly review all professions, excluding healthcare professions, just to ensure, is the regulation and oversight still required, and is it still relevant to the regulations and laws that are in the state of Kansas. So again, those are our 2 key points. Professional licenses held by women at 3 times the rate, and just in this environment of government efficiency, best practices in place and guardrails to reduce additional red tape is what we're all looking for. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you very much. We're going to hold for just a moment on that. We do have written only from Randy Stuckey, who is Vice President of Governmental Affairs for Kansas Grain and Feed. And we all have a neutral. Is Clay Barker online? Barker?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State, and we are neutral on this bill. We have no position on the concept of flagging, analyzing, and sunsetting occupational licenses. Our concern is with the mechanics of implementing it, especially since our agency was given a major role in that. And we had our staff just look at this for the mechanics, and briefly what the two areas they found that were problems is, one is it's not clear to us what an occupational license is. I know we all have a notion of what it is. Just a quick look through statutes and regs. There's about 2,700 references to licenses in law and 1,500 in regulation. Now, obviously, a lot of those wouldn't come close to being an occupational license, but it's hard to distinguish between what might be a job-related task versus an occupational license. And we listed just a few off the top, first few regulations in our testimony, like a milk hauler license, a pesticide license, live plant dealer licenses, but there's probably a lot more than you might think out there with regulations and statutes. Second, things like a notary public, which might be the one occupational license our office issues. Some people live off that commission. Others might use it once or twice a year. So I'm not sure if that would qualify as a occupational license. And our staff also identified a few other agencies that issue licenses that might be considered healthcare providers that aren't listed in the bill. And we need clarification on that. The second issue was our role in flagging regulations with occupational licenses. We have no real expertise in that. We'd just be searching through words like anyone else that would be tasked with that. And it might be faster and cheaper to have agencies self-report what they think are their own occupational licenses. Because I could envision our staff bringing a list to me, then I'd make a legal decision on it. And I'd probably end up calling a lot of agencies and saying, what is this thing? What is this license? What does it do? How many people use it? To make a call on that. And last, there are, rough count I got from the revisor, 29,000 laws in Kansas and 9,000 regulations, but a regulation cannot be issued unless a law specifically directs it to be. And the way this bill is written, it looks like the regulations are flagged 18 months before the review, but the statutes aren't flagged till about 12 months before. And it might be faster to have the revisor flag the laws first that create occupational licenses. And then who's ever looking at the regulations takes those laws and find regulations that are authorized by those laws. And that might be a faster way of identifying which are occupational licenses. But again, Mr. Chair, I fully understand the goal of the bill. And I know there's a lot of concerns with too many occupational licenses, too much education requirements and all that sort of thing. And we'd be happy to work with anyone on just some of the mechanics of getting this done. And I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. I think now would be appropriate time. We'll ask for questions of the committee. Committee, are there any questions that you have for any of our proponents or are neutral? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is best for Mr. Reimer or maybe Mr. Barker, but I would just say I've been contacted by kind of a variety of different entities. I'm not sure if other colleagues have as well, but seems like there's just a lot of confusion in this about who is covered, who is exempt, whom those exemptions apply to. I just know that I've gotten several emails over the past couple days from wildly different sort of license holders in very different areas, just wondering if this were enacted, would we be considered part of the exempt group? Would we not be? And so it just struck me that if other colleagues are in this similar boat, that there may be a real need for trying to get some more clarity around this before we move forward with it. Don't really object to the overall intent. I think it's well-intentioned and well-meaning. But I just want us to make sure that if we move forward with this, that we're clear on exactly whom is covered and whom is exempt, and that those license holders and those regulators would know kind of which buckets folks are in. So that's it, Mr. Chair, and would welcome any response anybody has to that, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any others? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is along the lines of Senator Corson's questions, if anybody can answer. So two big groups that jumped out to me that it's just not immediately clear. Where would attorneys fall and where would teachers fall under this bill if enacted?
Those are good questions. Anybody want to take a stab at that answer? I think we'll have to get an answer later on.
So,
on that.
Chairman?
Yes.
Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can just respond briefly to that. I'm not prepared to give a thorough answer, but in general, attorneys are regulated by the courts, by the Kansas Supreme Court. So they would probably fall outside the scope of this bill. With respect to teachers, I think that's maybe a more difficult question because, again, I think there are constitutional provisions pertaining to the Board of Education's authority over teachers. So that would require a little bit of looking into as well. But there are, provisions that potentially would exclude both those occupations from the bill.
Okay. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. Okay. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to concur with Senator Corson. I have had a few interactions with folks who just think the bill's a little clunky and doesn't really clarify as much as it needs to, not just process, but on some of the licensing piece. So I think more work needs to be done before we move forward with this. It's just a little too broad, I think, with too many unknowns. So I'm not, as Senator Titus said, I'm not opposed to the general and Senator Corson, the overall concept of the bill. And I would love to know how it worked well in Colorado and probably need to do a little research on that. Just not sure we're quite there yet with this bill. That's just my concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else online? Questions? Are there any other questions for Senate Bill 229? Any other questions for 229? Okay, so I'm going to open it up back to Senate Bill 117. Are there any questions for 117? Hearing none, we'll move forward we'll close the hearing for these two, and we're going to open the one for SCR 1606. And that is approving a creation of a port authority for Wyandotte County. And Charles, you also have that one?
Yes, Chairman, members of the committee. So this concurrent resolution is quite a bit simpler, at least on its face. It simply approves the creation of a port authority that is sought to be established by the unified government of Wyandotte County in Kansas City. And as the committee probably is aware, a concurrent resolution is required by statute before a port authority can be established by a local government. And it's an economic development district that cities or counties can create either individually or jointly. And there are some economic development advantages to the city or county when they establish that. There are a number of statutes that govern a port authority, including, that it's the port authority itself. It has to be governed by a board of directors appointed by the governing body. It has to have a statement of purpose. It can employ employees and professionals. There needs to be a plan, and the Port Authority holds a hearing on the plan. The Port Authority has some broad abilities to purchase and construct real estate and construct facilities, certain facilities, and also issue bonds, for the purpose of the economic development plan. So that's what the resolution does. It would just authorize the unified government to go ahead and establish the Port Authority as required by statute.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to our first proponent, Senator David Haley. David, are you online?
I am. Thank you, Chairman Alley. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Thank you, sir, and members of the committee for hearing this. As outlined SCR 1606, I do appreciate Mr. Reimer's review of what this would do by way of authorizing the creation, or actually a recreation now, of a port authority for my county, Wyandotte County, now called the UG, or Unified Government of Wyandotte County in Kansas City, Kansas. Succinctly, and I won't belabor the issue, Mr. Chairman and members, this is a measure that we heard last year before the committee. It came out of committee on a consent calendar, was passed the Senate, and then ended up going over to the House, where it just basically got bundled into another measure and has subsequently died. I'm asking for this year's committee's consideration and potentially working and passing, maybe even consent calendar, this measure. Finally, I'll be happy to stand for questions when they are. What this does is to allow, as Mr. Reimer shared in his overview, that Wyandotte County could create a port authority. We had one for a long time, many, many years, and we gave it up, the Port Authority, to create some economic development for a General Motors plant in my district. Since 1981, it's been established that counties or municipalities cannot enact port or ports authorities without permission from the legislature. So that's what this is. This is simply allowing SCR 1606, Wyandotte County to, if they want, which they've indicated they do, to have another port authority. And finally, let me say, Mr. Chair, before standing for any questions, I do appreciate the consideration of this identical measure from last year. This had overwhelming or very large support in the Senate and was ready to have overwhelming support in the House as well until it got bundled into another measure. But you do have my written testimony. I think it's some interesting reading about the history of our Port Authority. It's an economic development tool that will help along the riverfronts of Wyandotte County to bring and streamline some many opportunities as we continue to develop and to grow. And I thank you very much for having this hearing and for the consideration of the committee and hopefully working this SCR very soon. I'll be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Committee, we also have a written-only proponent, Paul Davis of Unified Government of Wyandotte County, so make sure you review that. Are there any questions of Senator Haley?
Senator, this is Jeff Clem. I do have a question.
Yes, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Haley, you had mentioned in your positive support for this that the reason it didn't pass the House is it was bundled. I just wanted to get clarification that's from your perspective, that was the only reason, because this does make a lot of sense and should have been supported. I'm just curious if that was an act. Did I hear that correctly?
Chairman Alley, Senator Clem, my understanding is, and there was some discussion about the other legislation that was on the House. It was during some discussion of star bonds, and they wanted to have it. So this resolution, of course, by another number, was bundled into the bill at the end of session, regular session last year. And that bill did not advance. It included star bonds. It was not until a special session was held that another star bond initiative came out, and it was the desire to keep that bill clean or without any other amendments. And so what was streamlined by its inclusion of this resolution in another form last year in a bundled bill that included star bonds was left on the table for another time. I have visited or did visit with the House, the chair of various committees, including Commerce, who's expressed some genuine support for for this measure at that time last year. But it got caught up in the procedures of wanting to keep a clean STAR bond bill. And here we are again.
Thank you, Senator Haley, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We are going to, if there's no other questions, we are going to close the hearing on SCR 1606. And there are a couple announcements I would like to make concerning weather days and that sort of thing. We did ask the President's office about WebEx and voting. We do know that there are several that may not be here the rest of the week, but if we have a meeting, which we plan to meet at 1:30 every day, you can vote by WebEx. This is according to the President's office, if we are live online and you are live online. So if you're live online and we do have a vote, you can vote on roll call vote by WebEx, and we will be doing that if necessary for the meetings the rest of the week. Also, if you have amendments or any of the bills that previously heard, please bring those to committee with you when we work the bill, and bring copies to hand out to the rest of the committee. So I will say this, Thursday, tomorrow, we will be working as many bills as we can get to. We're going to start with Senate Bill 51, Senate Bill 52, Senate Bill 117, and Senate Bill 199, and then previously heard. Do we have? Yes, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Should we anticipate that we'll be meeting on Friday?
We will meet on Friday. We are working right now to maybe move that up to 9:30 if possible. We're going to check with the other committees, and we got enough work to do to get done this week, and we want to work Friday if possible. So
okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that update. Thank you.
If there's no other questions.
Oh, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Senator Blue.
Yes.
For those of us who have to work from home due to lack of childcare, and I'm stuck here, what would you suggest on the process for amendments if we're going to be via WebEx?
I'm going to ask revisor's office. Hang on. Amelia will maybe give us some enlightenment on this.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my understanding based on what the chairman has explained is that those members of the committee who are going to participate live in the meeting via WebEx would be allowed to vote on motions and offer motions to amend for the bills that are being worked. The paper copies of your proposed amendments or your balloons, please let Kyle or I know which ones we need to bring to committee, and we will prepare those copies and bring them with us.
They need to be submitted prior to on that one.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you for meeting today, and if there's no other business before the committee, we are adjourned.